Hello everyone, my name is Anitsu, and I'm back with another Digimon budget deck profile video for Special Booster 1.0. So this time I'm going to be talking about the blue budget deck, and just like the red and the yellow budget decks, it does have two variants where you could build it with the starter deck and without the starter deck. So going over real quickly the version without the starter deck, starting with the Digitama, we're going to be running 4 copies of Wanyamon. So Wanyamon is just the budget Digitama, and it actually isn't that bad for the deck because it has a nice inheritable ability where during your turn, while the opponent has 2 or more Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it, then this Digimon gets plus 2000 DP, and that's pretty good considering blue doesn't really have a whole lot of ways of DP boosting. So a lot of their Digimon end up being relatively weak compared to the opponents, so having some way to DP boost is definitely really good for the deck. Next, on to the rookies, I'm running 4 copies of Armadillomon, just because Armadillomon is a really interesting rookie to play, just because you're mostly going to be playing him for his play cost, because it's a relatively low play cost. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Elecmon. So Elecmon is in here just because he is the overall value vanilla card because he's very cheap to play, very cheap to digivolve into. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gomamon. So Gomamon is in here because he gives this nice inheritable ability where on deletion you gain 1 memory. So in case your Digimon is deleted while he's in the Digivolution source, then you will be gaining a memory off of it. So if it's during your turn and it just dies, then you could use the memory to extend some of your plays. Or if it's during the opponent's turn and it dies, then you'll be able to take away one of their memory effectively to basically try to put them off of their game. So Gomamon is pretty decent overall to have as a base inheritable. And then the last rookie of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Monmon. So Monmon's really only in here just because he is the blocker of the deck. Next up, on to the champions, I'm going to be running Frigimon. So Frigimon has jamming. That's really the only thing interesting or noteworthy about him, because jamming is good so that he could survive security checks against the opponent's Digimon, because again, we don't necessarily have a whole lot of efficiency in terms of DP boosting, so our Digimon could die to security checks, and Frigimon with jamming helps us not die to those security checks. Next up, I'm running 4 copies of Leomon. So Leomon's pretty good because he has this innate ability of on deletion gain 2 memory. So this is pretty cute because it combos really well with Gomamon, where if you have a Leomon with Gomamon in its inheritables, then on deletion you'll be gaining 3 memory, and that's just a lot of memory to gain all at once. So Leomon is in here mainly to combo with Gomamon, but he's also just a pretty decent card to start aggroing with just because gaining the 2 memory could extend some of our plays or put the opponent off of their plays. And the last champion of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Gorillamon. So Gorillamon's really only in here just because he has this Digivolution cost of 1, and that's really it. Next, on to the Ultimates, I'm running 4 copies of Monzimon. So Monzimon is pretty good because he has a very low play cost in case we just need to play him, on top of which he has a very low evolve cost, just to be a really good powerful tempo card to digivolve up into and try to digivolve into our megas. And then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Loader Leomon. So Loader Leomon is a pretty decent ultimate just because he has this very, very high DP. So that's the only real reason why we want to use Loader Leomon, is because he is an ultimate with high DP, so he allows us to try to aggro out a little bit sooner than what the opponent might be wanting, and hopefully because of the high DP, we have a higher chance of keeping him around. Next, on to the Megas, I'm running 4 copies of Saber Leomon. So Saber Leomon is a really powerful Mega just because he has this nice when Digivolving ability where we get to trash 4 Digivolution cards under one of the opponent's Digimon. So basically, when you Digivolve up into him, he's just going to wipe out all of the Digivolution sources off of the opponent's Digimon, which is really, really powerful because it takes away basically all of their abilities, if they had any, outside of the innate ability that they would have. And then he combos very well with Wanyamon to help set up Wanyamon. So overall, Saber Leomon is really, really nice. Even though his DP isn't super great, his ability just is really strong for the deck, especially on a budget. And then the last mega that we're going to be running is 4 copies of Metal Seadramon. So Metal Seadramon is a pretty solid mega because it has 2 abilities. It has a nice powerful on play ability where you get to return 2 of the opponent's level 4 or lower Digimon back to their hand and then trash all of their Digivolution sources. So if the opponent is trying to go wide, then Metal Seadramon definitely helps with playing against that go wide strategy. And then on top of which, he has a very nice ability where during your turn, this card cannot be blocked by your opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution sources. So if they just have a blocker with no Digivolution sources sitting on the field, then Metal Seadramon basically is unblockable, and that's just pretty powerful. Again, the only unfortunate thing is he is rather low on the DP department, so you do have to watch out and be careful of that. Next, on to the Tamers. I'm running 2 copies of Matt Ishida. So Matt is pretty good because he is the memory fixing tamer of the deck, where if our memory is 2 or less, then our memory becomes 3. And then he also has a really nice ability where during your turn, when you play a blue Digimon, you could suspend this tamer and then trash the bottom Digivolution source of one of the opponent's Digimon. So this is kind of how you aggress on trying to get the opponent to have no Digivolution sources, and we definitely have a whole bunch of very cheap and efficient rookies that we just want to play to trigger Matt's ability. And then because we trashed Digivolution sources with Matt's ability, it just allows us to get the buff from Wanyamon that much easier, and allows Metal Seadramon to become unblockable a little bit easier. So overall, Matt is just a very good card for the deck. Next, on to the options. I'm running 2 copies of V Nova Blast. So V Nova Blast is pretty decent because it has the main ability of giving one of your Digimon jamming. So jamming, again, lets you live those security checks against the opponent's security Digimon, and that's just pretty solid to have. Sometimes it doesn't matter because sometimes you're just going to win the security check anyway, but the threat is still always there, and that's kind of why we need V Nova Blast in the deck. You could probably max this out at 4 if you're really afraid of the opponent's security, but I just left it at 2 just because it is, again, an option available to us on what we could play and what we could do. And then it also has a nice security effect of adding itself back to our hand. So if this is in our security, then we just get it into our hand to then use the following turn, if we so choose. And then the last option card and the last card of the deck is going to be 2 copies of River of Power. So River of Power is basically doing everything that Metal Seadramon is doing, just a little bit differently, where we get to return up to 3 of the opponent's level 3s back to their hand instead of 2 of their level 4 or lesses. So this, again, really is only good against those like go wide rookie strategies, and it really is a powerful card against it because it really puts them off their tempo. And that's really the only real reason why we're running it, is because blue doesn't really have any other forms of removal, so we still need something, and something is better than nothing. And then in terms of what you get from the starter deck that kind of like changes the deck a bit is you get Sunemon. So I still think Wanyamon is just the overall better Digitama in comparison of the 2, but Sunemon is still a pretty solid Digimon that you could add in just because he's a 5th Digitama, and then on top of which, he still has a really powerful ability of during your turn, this Digimon gets a plus 1000 DP when battling an opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution sources. So it allows you to basically try to win those trades more efficiently, and sometimes you just have to beat up on the opponent's Digimon, and he allows you to trade more efficiently. We're still going to be running Elecmon, but we're going to be reducing him to 2 just because we have the Gomamon of the deck, and we still want to play Elecmon because he's still a very good value vanilla card. But again, we have Gomamon from the starter deck that does the same thing. We're going to be running Gomamon all the same just because this Gomamon is still pretty good. But we are going to be adding in 4 copies of the Gabumon from the starter deck because he has this really nice ability of when attacking, you get to trash the opponent's Digivolution card on the bottom of one of their level 5 or less Digimon. This is a really good skill to have because on attack it allows you to basically start attacking the opponent's evolution sources, so it gets you closer to having the buff from Wanyamon. It could help make Metal Seadramon unblockable, and so on and so forth. So it's just a pretty solid card to have that synergizes with the deck. We're going to be adding in 4 Grizzlymon from the starter deck just because Grizzlymon is now the blocker of the deck, so we don't really need Monmon, which frees up a whole bunch of deck space for using whatever we actually feel like we want to use. so Grizzlymon is definitely really good for that blocker slot. But we are going to be adding in 4 copies of WereGarurumon, just because WereGarurumon gives a really powerful inheritable ability of during your turn, while your opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources, then this Digimon gains Security Attack +1. So it allows you to deal more damage, and it isn't hard to get a Digimon to have no Digivolution sources, and it's just one of the opponent's Digimon needs to be without Digivolution sources. So that's just really, really powerful because we can pick off 1 or 2 abilities really, really easily. And again, the damage output that he adds is definitely very, very good. Now, if you wanted, you could still run Loader Leomon and run like a 2-2 split between WereGarurumon and Loader Leomon. It's just, I feel like with WereGarurumon, it's a better ability to have, and it's just a really solid card. Then, because we have other megas we could play, we're going to be cutting down on the Saber Leomons, and we're also going to be cutting down on the Metal Seadramons, just because, again, we get the megas from the starter deck. So we're going to be running 2 copies of Plesiomon, just because the starter deck only comes with 2 copies, and he is a value vanilla card with some high DP, and the high DP is really the reason why we want to play him, just because, again, Blue doesn't have a whole bunch of Digimon with high DP, so they could lose to security checks relatively easily, but Plesiomon having 12,000 DP would definitely give us a better chance at seeing our cards survive. And then we're also going to be running the 2 copies of the Metal Garurumon from the starter deck, because Metal Garurumon is a really solid card because of his when attacking ability. Once per turn, you get to unsuspend this Digimon. So basically, Metal Garurumon can attack twice, which is pretty powerful because if you have him stacked with WereGarurumon, then he could potentially hit for 4 security. On top of which, if you have Gabumon, then he'll also be chipping away at the opponent's Digivolution sources. So he's just a very, very good card to have overall. In terms of our options, we're going to be adding in 4 copies of Hammer Spark, because Hammer Spark is just a very, very good card, because it allows you to just 4-0 memory, gain 1 memory, and then it has a nice security ability of just being able to gain 2 memory. So whether it's in the hand or in the security, just being able to gain memory is a very, very powerful effect to have, and that's why we're running Hammer Spark. But if you really wanted to, you could still run V-Noble-Blast to give to Metal Garurumon or some of your other megas for the jamming ability. The option is really up to you. And because we are going to be running the blue starter deck, we also get 2 copies of Cocytus Breath. So Cocytus Breath is a very powerful blue option because it is basically the main source of removal, where we get to bounce 1 of the opponent's Digimon back to their hand. Ideally, you're going to be wanting to target their mega, so that way they have to rebuild the whole mega again, and sometimes we just can't deal with certain megas, so getting rid of a card, even for a little bit, is still very, very powerful, and that's why we run Cocytus Breath. And then in terms of other options of other cards that you could think about, if you could get 4 copies of Woopamon, I would 100% get 4 copies of Woopamon. This is just one of the better Digitama of the game for blue, and he is very, very good because he allows you to draw cards when attacking if the opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it. So just being able to draw extra cards is very, very good, and even though he doesn't give any DP buffs, the extra cards in our hand definitely allows us to see more of what we want. Then if you could also get 4 copies of Gabumon, I would 100% get 4 copies of the on-play Gabumon, because this card is just really good, whether you Digivolve into it or just raw play it. For its ability, you're still going to be netting 1 card off of it, so it's just a very, very good card to have overall. If you really wanted to, you could get the on-play Gabumon, the promo version, but you could also just play some other on-play megas that you could just splash into the deck. But the on-play Gabumon is really interesting to think about because he is continuing to attack the Digivolution sources off of the opponent, and if you decide you want to get end-play Metal Garurumon, then he could combo in that as well. But again, you could just play some of the other on-play megas and be totally just fine. You could also think about playing the promo Gomamon, just because the promo Gomamon has a very nice inheritable ability where during your turn, once per turn, when you trash a Digivolution card off of one of the opponent's Digimon, then you gain 1 memory. So gaining memory is very, very good, and the deck is already kind of attacking the evolution sources, and this Gomamon is really good for rewarding you for attacking those Digivolution sources. You could also run Dolphmon. So Dolphmon is also a really good Digimon because he is one of the few blue Digimon that give a DP boost. So his inheritable ability is during your turn, while your opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution cards in play, this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP. That's just really good to have because it's not hard to get the opponent to have a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it, and again, the DP boost is really, really nice. You could also think about running Garurumon. So this version of Garurumon is really nice because he has a very powerful on-play ability of unsuspending one of your Digimon. So if you have enough memory, then you could play him to unsuspend one of your Digimon to get another attack off. And again, that's just something really, really powerful. But you could also run the starter deck Garurumon if you want to try to keep attacking the opponent's Digivolution cards to make sure that they don't have any ability. So this is basically doing the exact same thing that the Gabumon from the starter deck is doing. It's just this one doesn't need to be a level 5 or less Digimon to attack its Digivolution sources, and it's just a Digimon. So if you want to just continue trying to play harder into that attacking the evolution sources strategy, then this Garurumon is very, very good for that. In terms of other options you could run, you could think about running Mad Dog Fire, just because Mad Dog Fire is a DP boost card, where for one memory you just give a Digimon plus 3000 DP. So with all of our Megas, it could definitely help them win security checks, and it'll make you definitely a lot less afraid of losing those security checks. So thinking about this card is definitely a possibility, on top of which it does have a security effect where you do get to draw a card and then add this card back into your hand, so that's just not a terrible ability to have on a DP boost card because blue already wants to draw a lot and blue is already a very efficient color, so sure, this card's just decent. If you really want to continue drawing cards, you could just run Boring Storm. So Boring Storm just allows you for one to draw a card. I don't particularly think this card's that great, but is definitely something you could run. Its security effect is a little bit better where you get to draw 2 cards, but again, I just don't think this card is super great because you're just basically playing a card to just do nothing but try to cycle, and the cycling effect is okay. It's just not exactly what you want to be doing. But it is definitely a possible option of a card you could run. Then you could also think about running Kaizernail because Kaizernail has some really fun and interesting applications where you basically get to choose a Digimon in one of your Digivolution sources and then you get to separate it as another Digimon. And then that's just pretty powerful because you could set up a whole bunch of really interesting plays with it. So it does allow you to combo with the Garurumon. It does allow you to combo with the Gabumon, so it does have some interesting applications, and it could be a definitely interesting card to think about using. But for the most part, this is just kind of the blue budget deck. Blue is definitely a very interesting color. I do think that the unfortunate thing is the lack in DP does kind of hold the color back from being a more powerful budget deck, but it still is doing a lot of really powerful things, and you could easily convert this into a Rookie Rush deck if you so choose, because Rookie Rush is definitely a very cheap and efficient strategy. It does have its own pros and cons, but that's for something else. But regardless, the blue budget decks are definitely really, really interesting, and they definitely have a lot going for them, especially if you're just looking for something to pick up and play. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.